Beth, thank you so much for coming on the Hertz Healing podcast. It's a real honour to have you on.
Absolute pleasure.
Will you start off by telling us why you think teenagers' mental health has reached such a critical low point?
I think our teenagers are living in increasingly challenging times. There's huge amounts of pressure on them across the board. And what young people say to me is I'm not only having to deal with what's going on immediately around me with my family, the pressures of school, but I'm also having to deal with all of the additional pressures of what's happening in the world and my social status online. I'm comparing myself not just to my friends in my class, I'm comparing myself to every possible teenager in the world. So I think our children are living in really different times where they have additional pressures, additional expectations that are put on themselves as well as by others, and also a sense of not being able to do the things that we know are really good for our health and well-being. So, for example, just being able to get enough physical activity, being able to hang out with other people without technology. These are all really important things that our children need to have opportunities to do in their development. And the way that we're living our lives is making that increasingly difficult for them to get those positive experiences.
I mean, do you think that the way Australia is going by banning social media for under 16s is, first of all, do you think it's doable in this country? And second of all, do you think that's the right move?
I think it really sets a precedent for saying we really appreciate how much this is affecting your life as children and affecting your opportunity to grow and develop. I think ultimately it would probably be quite hard for us to do that in the UK because we're a bigger country, and I think there's more challenges. We're introducing a policy to look after young people's mental health better through having more control over digital technology. But I think it's an interesting move which will hopefully improve those young people's mental health and well-being, which will then maybe give enough motivation for other parts of the world to also move in that direction.
How do you advise parents to navigate the sort of, muddy waters of things like social media and technology, and how can they impose realistic sanctions on their children whilst not actually alienating from the process and making the child feel as though they're alienated from their peers?
I think it's so hard. I'm a parent. I've got 3 kids. They're all teenagers, and their phones are such an important, integral part of their life, connecting to others. And if you lived through the pandemic, your children and teens and yourself relied on online to communicate with others. So I think it's something that is difficult to find the balance with as a parent, because you don't want to get into the trap of demonizing it, because by demonizing it, you push your child potentially further away from talking with you about some of the challenges they might have online. So there's something about creating boundaries which are realistic and you can enforce at home. So, for example, just protecting meal times from any digital technology and being able to do that yourself as a parent as well. So you honour that boundary. But actually taking an interest in your child's online world can be particularly helpful in giving them the opportunities to share with you some of the challenges that they may be facing, whether that's with a peer group who might be messaging destructive messages, or whether it's about them seeing content online that's been really distressing. So keeping an open mind whilst maintaining boundaries, I think, is one of the key things that I've tried to do as a parent. And then really enabling your children to have space and opportunities to do those things outside of digital technology. And sometimes that does mean trying to encourage your children to get outside, do something together as a family, creating little rituals and routines at home where we just play a game of cards. I know it sounds crazy and it's such a simple idea, but quite often with my teenage children, they actually really enjoy the interaction that you have by doing some of those simple things. So sometimes just creating shared opportunities to watch TV together, but a show that they're interested in can give you the opportunity to connect so that your child isn't becoming increasingly isolated on their own in their room, engaging in things that you might not be aware of. And therefore there is, of course, the higher risk of them engaging with other people or content that could be harmful to them.
That's a very good point. And I think that there's often a reluctance that's attached to, oh, come on, let's play a game. And there's the initial like, oh God, really, do we have to? But actually, when they get into it, they realize, actually, this is quite fun. I'm really enjoying this. And I think actually the more that parents can be proactive, because so many of them by default, especially with young children, give them digital devices because, you know, for them it's much easier in a sense, isn't it?
I think that's the challenge. I mean, I'm a single parent and I rely on digital technology to keep my kids entertained and not causing aggravation or fighting with one another, because when they're on the devices, they are completely occupied. So taking that away, or at the end of a busy day, having the energy as a parent to try and create an activity that you think will get the engagement of your children that they're resistant about, is sometimes feels like the most difficult thing to do. So it's about picking your battles, really. And that's why, for me, the shared TV watching of a show that they're really into, like Modern Family, where you can both just relax and laugh, is often a really easy way when you've not got much energy as a parent. Or just watching your child game. My son actually really enjoys me watching him playing one of his games and taking an interest, and it's given me a new appreciation of how much he values that world and how he's interfacing with his friends, and I can kind of see why he enjoys it so much. And those little opportunities have meant that when something's happened, like he's seen pornography online, for example, or there's been something with my daughter where there's been something shared on one of the platforms which has created a lot of distress, they have felt able to come to talk to me about it because they believe that I understand the platforms, and I'm not going to immediately have the response of, I told you so, you shouldn't be online, I'm taking this away from you, I'm doing a ban, and those types of things. There's something about how do you show enough of an interest whilst also supporting them doing things other than being in that online world.
It's a very good point, because I think a lot of parents who have teenage children now aren't necessarily that literate with all the social media platforms. I mean, I'm of a generation which, you know, we weren't, as children, we didn't have access to social media. So even I'm incredibly illiterate when it comes to social platforms. And actually, as you say, if you can educate yourselves a bit about them and therefore relate to your children in their usage of it and not appear to be completely I do see with my parents with technology, it's just a foreign language to them. But if you can somehow acquaint yourself with it and just become, you know, familiar with what they're doing, I think it's, you know, going to count for a lot. Because also the more that they know, you know, it fosters a degree of respect, I think, in their usage of it.
It's so true. And I think we have to accept that for most of our teenagers, if they've got a question or a worry, the first place they want to go to get the answer is online. So our children will be drawn to accessing on the online world to make sense of the difficulties they face. So if your child is struggling around their mental health, or they're worried about anxiety or low mood, they probably will go to Google, or even more likely TikTok. So there's some research that's shown that children will typically go to a parent or carer to talk, then next to a friend, and then next to TikTok. So if you don't have a sense of why that world's important to them or how they're using it, you're kind of missing out on the fact that that world is a part of their support network. And the key is really, there's some great stuff online, there's some great platforms and apps there which have got a lot of evidence to support young people, particularly around their mental health. But there are also some terrible things as well, which take young people down a really unhealthy route. And so what you want to be doing with your child or teen, or someone in their life needs to be supporting them with, is making sure they're accessing the good stuff and not the unhelpful stuff. But they feel like they've always got you as a port of call to bring that stuff back to. And there might be times where your children don't want to talk to you about the stuff that's going on inside of themselves because they recognise that it will have an emotional impact on you. And so they may turn to their friends, or they may turn to the online world or a teacher at school. And it's kind of being aware of that as a parent, and not taking it personally. Lots of parents I work with find it really distressing when they discover their child has told somebody something at school but not told them. And often for many young people, they're trying to, or they believe they're trying to protect their parent, or they're really worried that when their parent hears what's going on for them, that they'll respond in a distressed and disappointed way, or perhaps they might get angry with them. So I think there's something about holding that in mind as parents, that quite often our children are really afraid of hurting us or distressing us, and they may unintentionally try to protect us by not telling us about what's going on in their world. So if you can kind of keep that at the back of your mind, it gives you a sense of how to behave in your normal daily interactions about things like conversations, about things like who we talk to when we're struggling, or where we go to for help, even if that's in the online world.
And is there anything you can do as a parent to encourage your child not to feel that way, not to feel like you'll judge them, not to feel as though you'll lose your temper? Can you give any advice to parents about how they can actually foster those open lines of communication and really encourage the child to share with them if they misbehave or if they feel that they're going down a slightly like rotten path?
It's so difficult, and I think having been through some difficult times with some of my children over the years, you recognise that they often have phases where they're maybe going through something, where they're trying to deal with something, and actually they kind of push you into the enemy camp, and they find it really difficult to open up and be vulnerable around you. And I think as a parent, that can be excruciatingly painful because A, you're really worried about your child. B, you want more than anything probably to have a good relationship with them and believe they can come to you. And C, some of the things that they might be doing could be quite destructive. They could look like they're quite damaging. They could even be destructive in the relationship with you. So I think as a parent, whether you're in a good place with your child at this moment in time or a tricky place, maintaining a kind of a position of, I will sometimes get it wrong as a parent because I'm a human being and I have emotions too. So the times when I've really struggled as a mum is when I've been feeling really under attack from one of my children, where I'm feeling that they're really not loving me. Sometimes you can feel like your children hate you in their response to you. And in that place, it can be so difficult to respond with calmness and love. And if you're living a busy life with lots of other pressures on you, other events that are happening in your life, it can sometimes feel impossible to handle those situations the best you can. And I think that's an important thing, an important thing to take away from hearing me, is that you won't always get it right as a parent, because we kind of all know, stay calm, be warm, be interested in your child's world, be curious, don't speak with judgment. But the reality is, when the chips are down and you've had a really stressful day and you've maybe got more than one child demanding something of you, you're not necessarily going to be able to be that calm, thinking straight parent who can give everything to that moment. And I guess for me, I've had to learn, and it's even harder for me as a parent, as a psychologist, because I know intrinsically all the stuff I should be doing. And quite often I find it almost impossible to do that in my own life because of my own emotional world and my own needs as a human being. So I think I try my hardest to be that parent who wants to not be judgmental, who wants to provide an open door for my children. But quite often I know my children won't experience that because of what's going on for me. So I take a position with my kids that sometimes I'm going to get it wrong as a parent. Sometimes I am going to end up shouting, or I'm going to end up getting really angry about something disproportionate to the situation. But my hope is that if I've kind of messed up in that way and I've created more distress unintentionally, that I will come back to you and I will have a conversation with you when everything has calmed down to say, I own this, I take accountability for the bit that I didn't quite get right. This is what might have been going on for me. Let's have another go at this. What can we do differently next time? And I think the powerful thing about that as a parent is you're helping your child understand that you can have emotions that take control and make you fall into things that you don't want to be saying and doing. But ultimately, you can have that awareness of the fact that you've maybe made some of those mistakes in the moment. You can name them. You can think about, well, I was really tired and I was really easily angered because, you know, you've broken something that was really important to me, or nobody's actually unstacked the dishwasher and I've done all of this today, whatever it might be. So you can help that your child get a sense of how emotions can be connected to words. And then you can help your child understand that in those states, we sometimes make mistakes. We sometimes do the things or say the things we don't mean. But what we're trying to do is build an awareness and learn from some of those times that we might not have got it quite right. And ultimately, if we've done something which has damaged the relationship, we're really keen to move towards repairing it. And from that place, your child learns, you know, if I mess up, if I don't do so well, then actually I don't have to be drastically ashamed of it. I don't have to kind of move to blaming other people and not taking any responsibility. I can actually myself find a way of maybe thinking about why things went the way they did, and then making amends or saying sorry or talking to the person that I've fallen out with. And I think if you think about teenage relationships with their friends, and teenagers having much higher emotions, feeling emotions much more intensely, they're going to constantly be in places where they're probably making those kind of mistakes in their relationships, but knowing that they can own it and they can then talk to their friend about what might have gone wrong and repair the relationship. That's just brilliant modelling for how we manage life. You know, if you're at work and you snap at your manager, then you need to be in a place where you can kind of go to your manager and say, I'm really sorry, I got that wrong. I appreciate I've got a lot on my plate at the moment, but that still doesn't, you know, make up for the fact that I lost my temper with you or I was rude to you. So there's something about how can we as parents be more forgiving of ourselves, really, when we get into these places, and then kind of model that to our children so that they can learn to kind of do the same.
Yeah, and I think the crucial point is as you say, it's actually owning it and being able to admit the vulnerability to the child and say, I'm really sorry I lost my temper. That was a disproportionate reaction. And, you know, let's talk this through. And actually being able to just say, you know, I did mess up, and being okay with that as a parent. Because I think when parents sort of pretend that they're perfect and as though they're the ones in command, and they've all, you know, it's all about the child and it's all the child sort of messing up and it's never to do with them, it's very alienating for the child. And I think that then encourages the child to slightly withdraw and to then isolate, and then you sort of come into bigger problems later on. And if you can dispel the shame and the judgment about just actually owning that you might have messed up and you might not be the perfect parent, and that's okay. And then it encourages, I think it then encourages the child to be more vulnerable in turn.
And I think if you think what children most want is they want a sense of safety. That's often what most of us want, is we want to feel safe, we want to feel loved, we want to feel cared for. And in those moments where we're struggling or our children are struggling, quite often people just feel less safe. And I guess one of the things I know is that parents often talk to me about is, you know, if I let my child or my teen know what's going on inside of my head, surely I'm just going to make them feel less safe, because they're just going to realise how completely incompetent and overwhelmed I am. So I think there's something which I talk about in the book about really thinking about the right time, the right place and the right pace of these conversations, so that when you're having those conversations with your child, you are able to make them feel safe. Because if you're doing it at the right time, so it's a good time for you where you're actually calmer and you're kind of in a place where you can think clearly and talk without being overcome with emotion. And it's a good time for them. They're not in the middle of something. They're not just kind of completely distracted by, if you've ever tried to go and have a conversation with your child when they're on their phone or on a game or just in the middle of doing something else, they're not going to be able to properly listen to you. So finding a time that works for them. And then the right place, quite often not having these conversations face to face is better. So kids and teens tell me all the time, the worst thing is when my parent walks in my room and says, I need to talk to you about something, and then makes it this really intense moment. They say, just have a conversation with me in the car, or when we're walking along, or when we're doing an activity in the kitchen where we don't necessarily have to have eye contact, because eye-to-eye contact can feel really intimidating in these phases. So just finding the right place, and there might be things that work for you and your child. So it might be that car journey to football on a Tuesday, or it might be when you kind of ask them to walk the dog with you, or it might be when you're doing a bit of cooking or clearing out the kitchen. You know yourself, you know your child well. And then the right pace. So trying to often start the conversation around something else that might be going on, a bit of a neutral starter before you go into talking about the thing that you're struggling with. Of course, if you've just had a massive argument downstairs and there's been slammed doors and you've been really distressed, then you might just have to kind of, when you're calm, go and say, I need to talk to you about what just happened. So I think if you're able to do that as a parent, then in that conversation, you're able to create a sense of safety, so that you're then not overwhelming your child with your own internal world, because I think that is what parents are worried about. And it's about giving the right information. So the right pace is really, don't bombard your child with everything that's going on for you, because that's only just going to create a sense of them feeling overwhelmed. It's just about sharing that information in a way that will help your child make more sense of your internal world enough to be able to learn from that, and then think together about what could happen differently next time, which would make it less likely that what just happened happens again. And quite often your children will come up with the ideas. They'll say, well, actually, if I put my shoes away, or actually, if I just unstacked the dishwasher, or I'd made you a cup of tea, Mum. And I mean, it's amazing how great kids are at problem solving and coming up with ideas, and how that immediately kind of takes you towards a completely different sort of conversation. And again, that repair after the rupture of what might have happened earlier in the day.
I think it is very tricky for parents when kids reach adolescence, and often they get into that very monosyllabic, grunty phase. And I think you see it often with boys, and then girls can just get a lot of attitude, and everything that a mother might say, particularly to a daughter, will trigger some kind of very disproportionate response.
Yes.
What advice do you have for parents who are just like, everything I say to my child just ends up in this eruption of rage, or it results in a grunt?
It's so difficult, and the challenges are teenage brains are developing in a way that makes teenagers really sensitive to any negative feedback, any criticism. So teenagers will see neutral phases as angry. So they will hear your tone of voice, which you think is light and airy, as being aggressive. And I've always had that with my children, like, I'm just talking in a normal voice. And they're like, no, you're not. You're really shouting, or you're really angry. I'm not angry. Yes, you are. So our teenagers' brains are predisposed, and it's all part of being more sensitive to pro-social behaviours. Because if you think about evolution, teenagers need to hang out together and be part of the pack in order to not be picked off by a lion, basically. So they need to learn the social cues and get it right. It's really high stakes. So that makes them much more sensitive to criticism or any type of verbal or non-verbal language which could be interpreted, or even not neutral. I mean, that's really hard as a parent. So I just think it's really important to know that. So sometimes when your teenager is responding to you in a really disproportionately negative way, it's often because that's how their brain is firing at the moment in time, rather than they really dislike you and they're being deliberately difficult. Because I think that can help us be a bit more compassionate sometimes about our response to them in that space. But I think it is really difficult, and I think it's even more difficult if you're worried about your child and you've seen a change, for example, in them, and you think this isn't them, this isn't usual for them. They seem to be spending a lot less time on their own. They seem to be withdrawing. They seem to be stopping doing the things that are important to them. And those things may make you question about whether they're struggling in some way in their emotional world. So I guess one of the things that I know works well, not just for teenagers, but everyone, is kind of observing what you're seeing in a kind and compassionate way, being really mindful about that so it doesn't feel like a criticism. So I've noticed you seem a bit down at the moment. I've noticed you haven't been coming out of your bedroom as much. Can I just check in with you and see if there's anything you need from me that might be helpful? Mm-hmm. So you're kind of taking that position of not criticizing, but just being curious. And then they might say no. And often when my daughter says no, leave me alone, I might just follow up a little bit more. I might just say, are you sure? Because I noticed that you seem to be having a few difficult conversations with one of your friends. You know, if you want to talk to me, I'm here. And at that point, she might decide to talk to me, or she might not. But the important thing is that you're acknowledging that you're noticing something different. You are worried, but you're there for your child. And then I think for some young people, it might not be you that they want to talk to, but it might be there's someone else in your tribe or your social network or your family or a friend or a school teacher. So I think it's holding in mind, if you're really worried about your child, how can you mobilize the support network around your family to provide opportunities for that young person to perhaps talk to someone else in their life? So can you organise a lift with your sister because you know they get on really well with that auntie? Or could you speak to the pastoral team or the teacher at school just to check in? You know, have you noticed any differences in your child? And then quite often they might be in a place where they can get someone at school to have a conversation, and that might just give your child that opportunity to open up to someone. But ultimately, as the parent, you're trying to just give the impression, I'm here in waiting, I'm not putting you under any pressure, and I'm going to be receptive to listening to what you've got to what's going on for you without reacting in a way that's potentially going to make you end up feeling worse. And I think one of the key things that we struggle to do as parents is listen. We often want to jump to solving the problem. But with good listening, we are just sitting back and we're creating the space to get inside our child's world. And quite often I just say it's a really simple formula. If your child does start talking to you about something, just sit on your hands, sit on your mouth. Try not to jump in with solutions. Instead, once they've been talking for a little while, just repeat back what they've said to you. Maybe change a few words just to show that you're listening, that you're not trying to kind of impose your view on them, but you're taking that information in and giving them that validation. Because what most people want when they're really struggling with something, they're afraid of judgment, they're afraid of criticism, but what they really want is someone to validate their internal world. And I think as a parent, you can really struggle with that if your child is telling you something you don't agree with or that you feel is terrifying you or worrying you as a parent. And I think the key thing is, if you're validating something, you're not saying, okay, I agree with what you've done, or I'm okay with what's happening here. But you're validating your child's feelings and their experience. You're showing them that what they're experiencing really counts and you care about it too. So it can start to feel like to your child or your teen that we're in this together rather than that they're the enemy. And I think that's a really kind of big shift away from what your teen or child might expect, which will then potentially allow you to then move on to thinking about what can we do about this? What help could I help provide? And I think again, it's going back to how can you include your child or teen in that problem solving, so you're not jumping to all the solutions, because quite often that process of talking it through will help your child reflect on what's going on and consider other ways of managing the problem, and giving them a sense of control as well, rather than feeling like you're just going to take over and you're just going to step in and you're just going to sort this all out. And again, that builds a sense of building competence and confidence for your child, that when things are really difficult, when I experience really strong emotions, it's not the end of the world, it's okay. And actually, with a bit of help, I can even come up with some of the solutions to these problems. And I think one of the things where this is most challenging for parents is if your child self-harms, because if you've discovered that your child is self-harming, in those moments you can feel completely overwhelmed by fear, by anger, by not really understanding why your child might hurt themselves. And so I think that's, for lots of the families that I work with, can often be a really difficult thing to understand and know how to handle.
And I think it's the case with deceit attached to things like eating disorders and addictions as well. And when a parent discovers that a child's been lying to them, and, you know, sadly it is the illness, and I think it's coming to the realization that the child is not the illness, they just happen to be struggling with something that's manifesting in a behavior. But it's very easy to fly off the handle and to get very angry when you feel lied to. That's a, you know, default human response, and to feel hurt and to feel let down. And how do you advise parents can navigate the sort of the world of deceit attached to mental health conditions with a child?
It's tough. It really is. And it's painful and wounding. And as a parent, in those moments when you might have that first realization of something that shocked you, or that deceit, you can sometimes, your automatic response cannot be the response that you know will ultimately be helpful. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that when you first find something out which really confuses you and baffles you, your emotional reaction might come out in a way that you didn't intend it to. And there's something about taking a step back, getting yourself in a space where you can kind of have that clarity of thought and manage those emotions, and then coming back to your child or young person to have a different sort of conversation. And again, owning the fact that you may have responded in a way that you didn't want to, but you automatically did. And I think quite often, even as a therapist, when a young person tells me something that I know that they're really ashamed to tell me about, I have to explain my response to them so that they understand that my face that I'm expressing when they're telling me that information is not my angry face, it's my worried face. Because actually I've got quite an expressive face, and when I'm listening to what somebody's telling me, quite often it looks like I'm angry rather than worried. So, and I think if you're already as a young person worried about judgment and somebody being angry with you and feeling a lot of shame, then you're probably going to look at that other person's face and just interpret it as, you know, the thing you're fearing most. So I think that's another really helpful thing to do for a young person, if you're a parent, to say, I'm really worried about this, but, you know, I'm here for you, and I think we've got this. But that might be why I am reacting in a way that might feel initially unhelpful to you. So again, it goes back to that owning and explaining a little bit of what's going on, but being really clear, like broadcasting what I really want is to show you how much I love you and how much I care about you. That may come out the wrong way sometimes, but I'm trying really hard to be as helpful as I can to you. And we can ask our children and our teens what's helpful. Some kids want to be touched. Some kids don't want to be touched. Some kids want to have a conversation in a particular way and others not. Sometimes young people don't want to talk about it. They want to text you about it, or they want to write it down in a letter. And so there's something about how you can check in with your child or teen. What's the best way to talk and share this information so that we together can find a way through this? Because again, going back to that idea, ultimately you want your child or teen left with the feeling that together we're stronger, and that you're struggling to cope in your life right now, and ultimately we want to find a way to help you cope better. And it's as simple as that, because the love and care is ultimately there. And I know I'm making it sound really easy, and I know it isn't that easy, but the kids I talk to, I mean, a lot of young people I have met have, you know, had quite, you know, difficult thoughts about ending their life, for example, or they may have self-harmed in a way that's required, you know, some hospital care. And they've described that perhaps the car journey to the hospital, the parent didn't say anything to them the whole way. And that left them feeling really like their parent was angry with them and didn't care about them in the way that they hoped. And then that parent got to the hospital and explained to them, I'm really sorry, I'm just kind of feeling exceptionally stressed about this and I want the best for you, so I know that I haven't been able to give you what you needed on the journey, and I'm really sorry for that, but I feel like I've got myself stronger now, and so what can I do to make sure you feel that I love you and that we're gonna be together on this. So it's really interesting, the stories that young people have told me about how their parents have potentially in the moment not been able to be the best version of themselves, but how those parents have recovered that through that discussion. And I think sometimes as parents, we're probably afraid of having that, owning that bit. We might not explicitly say, I think I've got it wrong on that car journey, and I really want to get it right, because we're just like, it's really hard to do that. But I think it's just important to know as a parent how forgiving our kids often are when we are saying sorry, or we're talking to them about how we're trying to get it right. I think the teens I talk to just love it when their parents apologise, and it really can often create a massive shift in the relationship that you might have with your child in a positive direction.
I was having a conversation with Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, and she said that when she was younger, her father used to say every week, so what's your failure of the week? And if they didn't have a failure, he would get really annoyed. And I think a lot of realization now, particularly when, CEOs are interviewed, is that, through failure we learn, and we don't learn from our successes. But how can you make a child safe enough to feel as though they can confide in you safely about their failures and to not feel judged?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first question you can ask yourself as a parent is, what's my relationship with failure? What's my relationship with perfectionism? How do I respond when I get something wrong in my life? How self-critical am I? How angry do I get with myself? Because that's probably going to be some of the underlying messaging that you might be giving your children unintentionally about failure. Because quite often, if you're a high-performing individual, in order to kind of be in that place, you've spent a lot of time kind of motivating yourself, sometimes with self-criticism. So I think the first thing is how do you model to your child that failing's okay? How do you genuinely, authentically do that? So how do you go about your everyday life, and when you mess up, you have a narrative that is like, okay, I got that wrong, but through getting it wrong, I learned this, this, and this. So that we start to show our children all the way through that actually getting things wrong, it leads us to getting things more right sometimes. So I think that's probably the most important thing you can do. And one of the interesting things research has shown is that we often think self-criticism is the route to motivate us to make improvements and change. But actually, in reality, we're much more likely to make improvements and change if we have self-compassion. Because self-criticism tends to just drive our threat drive up higher and make us less likely to move towards doing things in a better way. Whereas self-compassion, which is kind of like a kindness and a curiosity and a warmth towards ourselves, leads us actually to be much more likely to be able to learn from some of the things that we might have got wrong before. And I think just simply knowing that sometimes can help us, because if we live in quite high-performing households, we can sometimes believe that criticism is a way to improve performance. But knowing that kindness and warmth and that self-compassion actually is much more likely to lead to those gains over a longer period of time can kind of help you practice and exercise it more. But as we are all predisposed to notice the tough stuff and notice the negative stuff, because it's all part of survival, we have to actually really intentionally work at that. It doesn't just happen naturally. So we almost have to train ourselves. So as a parent, I am constantly talking out loud about this internal dialogue I have about, oh, I feel like I've really messed that up. But Beth, you need to be kind to yourself. Think about all the things that you've managed to do today and you have got right. And actually, this thing that's happened has led to you having a conversation with someone that you needed to have a conversation with. So I do a lot of self-talk out loud. So my children hear what's going on in my mind, and that internal dialogue that I often have to kind of help the self-critical voice, which is like a megaphone on one shoulder, not be so loud, and the little whisper of kindness and self-compassion to grow that bigger. And most of the kids that I work with anxiety or low mood, that megaphone is so loud, and it's kind of learning the skill of how you can turn up the compassionate voice. Most of these young people are exceptional friends to other people. They are so good at supporting other people, their friends, with seeing the positive side, kind of not beating themselves up about something. But when it comes to themselves, it's almost impossible. So it's kind of trying to help you be your own best friend. And quite often, sometimes just getting good at writing messages to yourself as if you are your own best friend can be a way to break that cycle of getting stuck on one thing that you feel like you've really messed up on. So that it's kind of like training the brain almost to notice the good stuff, to feel grateful and appreciative of your world, your life, and yourself, your uniqueness.
It's so funny. I was having the exact conversation with my therapist today, because she was saying you've just got to speak to yourself as though you would speak to a friend, and it's that old adage, and you're like, oh god, I've heard that before, but it's so true, because those of us who suffer with our mental health, actually, we do have a lot of inner critic that is amplified beyond a lot of people's beliefs, and it's so loud at times, and it's always there. And actually, if you can teach a child that, okay, we can work on this, but it is also normal to have that inner dialogue going on. Everyone has it to a degree. You're not exceptional. And making them feel okay with that, I think, can ignite a sense of acceptance. And then hopefully over time, it's a long process. And as you know, it takes a lot of conscious sort of saying, no, I'm actually not going to listen to you. I'm actually sitting here and I'm okay. I don't have to be at the party. I don't have to be, doing my essay right now. I'm just taking some time for myself. And I think a lot of these mental health issues can stem from that sense of, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I don't deserve X, Y, and Z. And actually, if a parent can make the child feel that, A, it's okay to have that inner dialogue going on, but B, that actually we can work on it to make that sort of grow and grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that learning to do the things that are important to you, like you, rather than your parents or your teachers or, your friends, learning to have the confidence sometimes to do the things that bring you joy and happiness is such an important part of that, because often the inner critic is telling you what you can't do, what you can't get right, that if you do this thing, you'll completely mess it up. So there's absolutely no way that you can go into town with your friends at the weekend, or there's absolutely no way you can go to school tomorrow because you've got German and you're going to completely mess up your speaking part of the lesson. You are going to fail in that area. And actually, one of the biggest things that we know for low mood and anxiety is how do you kind of help make sure that you still get out and do some of the things that are important to you, so that you can go to the inner critic, you know what, I went to German and okay, I wasn't perfect, but I did it. Or I actually went into town with my friends and there were a few awkward moments, but actually it went okay. It wasn't as much of a disaster as I thought. And I think that's the critical thing that happens for young people who get really stuck with anxiety and low mood, that it stops them in the end doing the thing they care most about. So most of the young people I work with who have got some degree of social anxiety or are struggling to go to school massively care about how well they're doing at school, massively care about friendship and belonging. And that's why they're anxious, because they want to get it right. They want to do well. But the anxiety's got so big, it's began to get in the way of them being able to do the things that are important to them, which often then leads them to feeling low in mood, because they're not doing the things that actually count to them. And a big part of helping young people break that cycle is often helping them make that connection. The anxiety is no longer helping me in this space. It's getting in the way of what's important to me. And it makes sense I'm feeling low, because the thing I care most about, which is friendship and belonging, I'm not spending any time with my friends. I don't feel like I belong. And then that motivation to find a way to get back to what's important to you, or even know what's important to you. A lot of our young people don't actually know what's important to them, what their values are. So if you can kind of help a young person to get in touch with what's important with them, because you can lose sight of that when things like anxiety and low mood get in the way, then you can think about how do you reduce the barriers to them getting into a space where they can do some of those things and experience that sense of, I can do this, and that sense of actually, being with my friends and people that genuinely care about me is helping me feel less anxious. It's helping me feel less low. And I know for many young people these days, it can feel like, how do you even begin if you're not going to school, for example? So many young people, 28% of young people are persistently not attending school. So how do you help if your kid isn't going to school, or your child is really struggling to go out the door at all? And in terms of thinking about how you build resilience and independence, it's giving your children more space to do things for themselves, so that they learn that they can do the things that often are being done for them. So it could be that your child is really anxious about one thing and you're struggling to manage that as a family. But by actually improving your child's opportunities to do other things, like, for example, making dinner, ordering a takeaway, getting independently from one place to another, can actually give them the experience of that kind of sense of agency. I can do this, which can build up their confidence and competence in one area, which then may well be transferable to those other areas in their lives. And I think that's one thing we kind of try to work out is actually how much free time do our kids get to just play and just take risks and not be supervised by an adult, or not be in their bedroom on their own, kind of in their online world. So it's thinking about what are some of the tasks that you as a parent automatically do in your household, which actually your teen could be doing, and actually getting quite a lot of positive feedback about how competent and capable they are. Like cooking, for example. I'm a single parent. I get home late. My kids have had to learn to cook out of necessity more than anything else. And they love it. But they've had like total independence from me. Like, I've not been able to micromanage what they're doing in the kitchen. And that's really worked well for them, because they've kind of made their own mistakes in the kitchen. They've got it wrong. There's never been that big a disaster. And through that process, they are really competent, capable cooks. And if I'd been hanging around a lot and watching what they were doing, then I think that they would never have got to that place of competence. So I think as parents, we need to start thinking about what are the things that we can encourage our kids to do more of completely independently, without us guiding and over-directing them, so they get the opportunity to learn just what they're capable of.
I'm curious to know what you say to parents who recognise that there's dysfunction within the whole family system, and they've got a child struggling with a mental health issue and they just don't know where to begin. I mean, do you find that a child's mental health is often correlated with the state of the family, and where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, we know that the biggest predictor of health and well-being is our social connections and positive relationships. So what's happening within your family and your family relationships is going to have a massive impact on your sense of well-being and your mental health. And we may cope with that in different ways. So for young people who might be struggling in a family where there might be things going on which are feeling unsafe and unsettling, it could be a divorce, it could be parental kind of disagreement, it could be the loss of a family member. These things create high emotions in other family members, and emotions are contagious. So if one family member is really struggling, even if it's your child and everything else is going okay, that does have an impact on the family. So I think acknowledging that if you as a family are having some challenges, whether that's you're having a challenge in your relationship as parents, you've had a significant loss, you've got financial strain or pressures which are impacting your ability to be emotionally available for your children, then it is likely and a normal response for your child to perhaps show emotions that are linked to that. And I think that's an important thing to recognise, that your children may experience a range of emotions that could come out through their behaviours. It could be withdrawal, it could be more easily distressed and upset by things, it could be accessing things or taking risks that are perhaps seemingly quite harmful to your child or teen. And it's like looking beyond the behaviour to understand what emotion sitting behind this. That is it sadness, is it anxiety about what might be going on in the family. And again, it goes back to that kind of position of how do you find safe ways to enable your child and you to get beyond what you're seeing on the surface, to understand a bit more about what's happening underneath. So then you can think about what support can we put in place to help us as a family as we go through this tricky time. What support can we put in place for you if as the child if you're really struggling, because you might need a bit more support at school. We might need to think about the network around us and how we create kind of stability. When I've worked with young people and families, and in my own life as well, experiencing significant loss of somebody dying in the family, or I broke up with my ex-husband 9 years ago. During those times, we relied more than ever on the network of people, our immediate community, to kind of provide some additional stability, to help, because I think we get really stuck in believing that we've got to manage all this stuff on our own. But often when we're going through these challenges, the time when we most need a good support network, we can feel the most isolated as a family. And a lot of that comes from the shame and stigma around things not going as well as how everybody else's life seems to be going, which again is perpetuated by social media, because if you're looking on Facebook, you might see all of your friends and having a really positive time, and it feels impossible to let people know what's really going on. But another part of it, I think, is not actually knowing how other people not knowing how to help, and then almost being paralyzed by that. And therefore, in a sense, you feels like you're ostracized, but it's not active ostracizing. It's more people not knowing what to do to support you and being afraid of getting it wrong, and in fact withdrawing from providing any support at all. So I guess one of the things that you can do is you can be explicit about how you need help from others, or what would be helpful, to give people permission to support you, if that makes sense. So absolutely, the challenges that are happening in a family are naturally going to have an impact on your child's emotional world. And I think it's just keeping your eyes open to that, and then thinking about opportunities to make sense of it. And I think that's a key thing. That's where trauma often comes from, not being able to make sense of things, especially if there might be pieces of information your children don't have access to. So the pieces of the puzzle don't quite add up for them. Quite often they'll blame themselves. They will be thinking, it's something I've done that's led to this problem, or somehow it's my fault. So quite often we might need to help our children with the story making around those situations, so that they don't fill in the pieces of the puzzle with things that might actually be really unhelpful for them.
And finally, Beth, what advice would you leave a parent who just wants to have a happy family? What would be the 5 ingredients of the happy family recipe?
Well, I think first of all, accepting that happiness is a small part of our emotional world, and it comes off the back of experiencing the full range of emotions. So, a key for me would really be, don't be afraid of emotions, whether they're your own emotions or they're the emotions of your children, because they're often windows into your own world that you're experiencing or your children's world. So being able to feel comfortable or get familiar with talking about feelings is a really important part of that. And again, thinking about failure and that pressure that we put on ourselves. Parental burnout in westernized societies is so much higher because we have exceptionally high expectations around ourselves as parents, and we are living more and more individualized lives. So the focus is on being able to cope entirely on your own. So thinking about, what's my community, where's my tribe, who are my cheerleaders, so you don't feel like you have to do this on your own. That kind of, it takes a village to raise a child is definitely true. And then moving back from having those exceptionally high expectations that you kind of want to be this particular type of parent and have this particular type of family. Quite often it just doesn't work out like that. But embracing that idea of a beautiful mess. And you know, I think one of the other important things to hold on to is actually when you're honest about how tough stuff is, and when you can kind of find ways to bring in humor, and you can sort of add, that humanness to life as a family, quite often what you get back from other people is a lot more love and a lot more acceptance, and actually a huge amount of relief, because most people are going round worried that they're not as good as the next person. So when you're honest about what might be the struggles that you're having as a family, and the kind of crazy moments that you don't want anyone else to know about, quite often other people start opening up about what's going on in their family, and you start to realise, actually, this is just the tapestry of life. So there's something about freeing yourself up from some of those expectations. And then finally, really, how do you look after yourself as a parent? I mean, it is the toughest job in the world, and it's so consuming. And it feels like it's so high risk sometimes, such high jeopardy, because ultimately you want your children to be happy. Every parent I ever meet says, I just want my child to be happy, and I just want them to grow into a happy adult and have a meaningful life, which is a big ask, isn't it? And it won't all be dependent on us as a parent. It's going to be dependent on so many other factors in our child's life that we can have no control over. So I think we of course have a really important part to play. So looking after ourselves, our own self-awareness, being forgiving of ourselves will help us be more forgiving of others, and really looking after ourselves, the things that we know are important, looking after our sleep, physical activity, those connections with other people is critical, because unless we can preserve our own energy levels, we are not in a place where we can provide the care for others.
Beth, thank you so much. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I'd urge everyone listening to buy a copy of your book, Happy Families. And yeah, congratulations. It's brilliant.
Thank you.